True. Let's go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirate lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chill drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamjiverse.
You could have had Carthaginians relocating there, and now we know the Carthaginians are of European origins from a DNA perspective. But when it comes to the bulk of the population, they were brown, and then some of them would have been black, and those percentages vary geographically and according to the time. This is what I said. I was right. Every single thing that I said now, demonstrated by DNA analysis. And it says every single thing that I've been saying and receiving backlash and hatred for years, all correct. Boom. This is what the genome says. Once again, the guy had brown skin. Yes, that doesn't make him an African though, because he's connected to the Levant. So unless you think that the Middle Eastern people that are more on the dark olive complexion, unless you think that those are black Africans, then the guy was not from Africa. Well, not African in the sense that he was a black African. Not this guy. This is not what the DNA says. And so that's a fact now. Like you get a Levant, which checks out. Absolutely checks out. Now, does this tell us about the freaking Paleolithic inhabitants of this area? No, it doesn't. But it does tell us about ancient Egypt. And at the end of the day, what population lived in North Africa in, at this point, 50,000 years ago? Doesn't matter when you're talking about ancient Egypt, because there was no pharaonic ancient Egypt 50,000 years ago. So if that's the discussion we're having, then it's different. We can talk about that. But because these people, usually my opponents, talk about ancient Egypt, and this is ancient Egypt. This is the very beginnings, the dawn of ancient Egypt. And will you look at that? What were the chances that the one guy that we managed to do a genomic sequence, Levantine origin? As far as I'm concerned, he can have dark brown skin. He can have black skin. It doesn't matter. He's not from Africa originally. He's from the Middle East. I mean, there are some Indians that are as dark as some black Africans. This is also to tell you how stupid it is to fixate on the words white and black when we talk about these things. But because they are the ones who fixate over it and weaponize the utilization of terms, they are the ones that say that the word Kemet, or Kumat, as it probably was localized, regardless, the word Kemet with a vowel of convention through Coptic, they are the ones that say Kemet means the land of the black, black meaning the people. But that's a modern way of using black that people didn't use back in the day. Even the Romans, it's not like they called black people black, they called them Ethiopians, meaning generally everyone of a phenotypic trait that would probably go from dark brown to jet black. But the Romans didn't call them black because that's a modern usage. But they do that. It's obviously the black soil opposed to the red soil of the desert. But no, they will say, no, it's the land of the blacks. It's not. It's stupid. You're reading it in a modern sense. And it's linguistic dishonesty. Because then when it's for them, then they'll tell you, well, white doesn't make sense because people didn't use it back then. But then why are you using black in the modern sense then? It's always a matter of intellectual dishonesty. But intellectual dishonesty can only take you so far until genetic data is presented and it tells us Levantine. Abstract. Ancient Egyptian society flourished for millennia, reaching its peak during the dynastic period, approximately 3150 to 30 BC. However, owing to poor DNA preservation, questions about regional interconnectivity over time have not been addressed because whole genome sequencing has not yet been possible. Here we sequenced a 2 times coverage whole genome from an adult male Egyptian excavated at Nuerat. Sorry if I mispronounced it. This is south of Cairo. Well, not too far from Memphis, in fact. Radiocarbon dated 2800 to 2800 BC, okay? He lived a few centuries after Egyptian unifications, bridging the early dynastic and Old Kingdom periods. The body was interred in a ceramic pot within a rock-cut tomb. And by the way, it's because he was a potter, among other things. Potentially contributing to the DNA preservation, most of his genome is best represented by North African Neolithic ancestry. Among available sources at present, yes, approximately 20% of his genetic ancestry can be traced to genomes representing the Eastern Fertile Crescent, including Mesopotamia and surrounding regions. So, this ancient Egyptian, we don't know how typical he was, but this ancient Egyptian has ties to local populations in North Africa and the Levant. Nothing further down. This genetic affinity is similar to the ancestry appearing in Anatolia and the Levant during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. But we did see that already the Carthaginians had Anatolian ancestry and Aegean ancestry, DNA and makeup. And once again, we see the same in Egypt, and it shouldn't surprise us because, again, North Africa is in the Mediterranean. This is what these people did. Whether you like it or not, these were seafarers. And they were settlers, they were colonizers, and they were spreading for economic reasons, sometimes more a trade network. Although more genomes are needed to fully understand the genomic diversity of early Egyptians, as I was saying, of course, I'm not going to say one is enough, but according to certain people, this should have been a guy from Sudan. Our results indicate the contacts between Egypt and the Eastern Fertile Crescent were not limited to objects and imagery, such as domesticated animals and plants, as well as writing systems, but also encompassed human migration. And human migration means intermixing. And intermixing is exactly what we're finding here, since 20% is from the Levant. This is phenomenal, guys. This is like, it's exactly what I've been expecting. Like all the years where we were looking at the pictorial evidence, we were looking at debating all the ways of it depends because the colors and the pigments, and then what about these vases? Because these vases are used as well, the same techniques are used in Mesopotamia. And they were like, no, because not from this place. We fought over this for years. Kept telling me I was lying. And now genomic, they do one, and it points to the Fertile Crescent. 0 DNA from Sudan, or Horn of Africa and whatnot. It is notable that both our QP-ADM modeling and mixture clustering excluded any substantial ancestry in the Nuerat genome related to the 4,500-year-old genome from Mota, Ethiopia, or other Central, Eastern, or Southern Africa. Southern Africa. I'm sorry. This is... Ooh, we need a trick, guys. Metatron. Metatron. But Metatron, man. Did I ever say that the ancient Egyptians of the Old Kingdom were white? No, that would be stupid. I never said it. Were there white Egyptians? Yes. Now given, make period. Because they relocated people from Greece, all that area. And then, of course, as the Roman invade, then a higher percentage, they also create some settlements, apart from the ruling elite. But they created some settlements where Greeks relocated, and then the Romans relocate there. So yes, there is a certain amount of Egyptians, the people that could have been born in Egypt, but they were originally from, I don't know, Italia. We do have some surnames in Northern Africa that are Celtic in origin. So yes, some Egyptians could have been white at that time, but that would have been a minority in the population. The further back you go, the further likely it is that the population will be white, or European if you don't want to use the word white. Some may have been, because finally we see an ancient Egyptian genetic connections. And it's Levantine. Man, I've been saying this. Anyways, anyways, this is the actual study. This is the full study. I've already read the entire thing, which took a while. I'll be honest with you. And when it comes to the genomic stuff and all the detailed explanation, I think I might need help from a professional, but regardless of that, my friends, and for this one I'm opening chat, because I need to see what everyone, and share the truth once and for all. I need to open this to everyone. Now, it's not, I'll be honest, okay, because you know me, I'm always intellectually honest, regardless of what people say. Of course, this is one person. So it's not that now I'm going to say every single ancient Egyptian had ties to the Levant, or that every single one had, but because I'm not the one who says they were all black, but I'm the one who said they were mixed, it seems like a certain expansion and population relocation already was a thing at the very beginning of ancient Egypt, as we always said. And now, we have proof. So how about we have a look? Let's read a little bit from here, read a bit from there, and then we see. So, teeth from an elderly man who lived around the time that the earliest pyramids were built have yielded the first full human genome sequence from ancient Egypt, and I'm all for it. The remains are 4,800 to 4,500 year old, overlapping with a period in Egyptian history known as the Old Kingdom or the Age of the Pyramid. They harbor signs of ancestry similar to that of other ancient North Africans as well as people from the Middle East, researchers report today in Nature. This is huge. And I'll show you, because what we are reading today, if you do this, okay, it shouldn't be that surprising. Because you see, when people claim that the ancient Egyptians' origin is down here, they're out of their mind. When they say it's from here, I'm like, okay, fine, I can see some people moving, great. If they say from Sudan, I'm like, well, that's relatively close. And one thing that I do agree with a lot of people that are usually my intellectual opponents, but I still will say it if I agree, is that if we consider the African humid period, then yeah, the Sahara wasn't a barrier if we go really, really back in time. Like I'm talking 14,000 years ago, all the way up to 5,000 years ago, this was green and all that, so it wasn't a complete blockage. Problem is that what they fail to admit is that there is no barrier here either. And what people often don't realize, I suppose, is that the African continent is literally connected by land to Asia and the Near East, which means you can walk it. So how are people okay with thinking that the ancient Egyptians, they were all from this area, they're okay with them going through this? But when you say, but what about population movement like this? Not to mention that you can move by sea. And we know for a fact that all of these populations, the Phoenicians, for example, did move by sea. So you can do this by sea, and you can do this by land. And yet they act as if there is a massive barrier here, which makes absolutely no sense. And now, not only we had clear indication of cultural continuity and connections between people from the Levant and ancient Egypt, because if ancient Egypt had zero connection to this section of the world and the Eastern Mediterranean, it would literally be the only North African area in the sea that would have zero connection, since Libya has those connections. Tunisia and Carthage, we just demonstrated that it's connected to the entirety of the Aegean, in fact, and to Europe up to a certain extent, and I know they're hate me for saying that, but I'm not saying it. DNA analysis is, and that's the same all the way here. All of this coastline, including my beautiful island of Sicily, is being continuously moved, showed population clusters from this area to go, but for some reasons they didn't go to Egypt. It is obvious that this is a conduit of multi-ethnicity. It is multi-ethnic like the rest of it, of this area here, but yet they act like this is a barrier. Well, it's not, and now we have proof, because the one single complete genome that we have from this period, genetically connected to this area. What you gonna say now? Are you gonna admit, oh wow, this goes away? Of course not, you're gonna say it's a lie. But who cares? I'm making this video for you, not for them. Non-sponsored, ladies and gentlemen, non-sponsored. You know what's funny? I'm celebrating, Nicholas, if you knew. Ancient Egyptian fact. So here's the thing. Dear noble ones, today's the day. Today is the day of vindication. It is the day of vengeance. Today's the day, my friends. So on Nature here, but I've got a few open, ready here, the tabs. We read, first human genome from ancient Egypt sequence from 4,800 years old teeth. 40 years after the first effort to extract mummy DNA, researchers have finally generated a full genome sequence from an ancient Egyptians. Big deal! And you know why this is a big deal, noble ones? This is a big deal because of the date. You see, this is not genome from an ancient Egyptians from the New Kingdom. This is not a genome of, but it's Ptolemaic Egypt. No, sir. This is from the very beginning of Egyptian history. We've got a full genome. So, if we consider some of the debates that I've had online over the years, this guy should be from what? Sudan? Am I right? Because if he's not, then we're going to have a problem. Because this is the very beginning of ancient Egypt. And I'll tell you all the details on who this person was. But let me just say that if anyone is going to try and say, oh, probably a tourist, this guy was pretty high, elite, pottery worker, though no, this was an ancient Egyptian, alright? Oldest and most complete ancient Egyptian human genome ever. Sequence that reveals ties to... I'm sorry, I need to do that.
Mesopotamia.
But this is not, you've seen nothing. You've seen nothing. And here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. Ancient Egyptian genome reveals 4,500-year-old genetic ties to Mesopotamia. This is a big deal. So this study is a study that is very recent.
Metatron's commentary on the Nuerat Old Kingdom Mummy doesn't simply miss the mark. It reeks of intellectual cowardice, racial animus, and an utter contempt for scientific rigor. He aligns himself with a grotesque tradition of racialized pseudoscience and white supremacy, twisting data to sever ancient Kemet from Africa, and gaslighting viewers with half-truths and outright lies. There is an outright fabrication and contextual deception with Metatron. Metatron gleefully proclaims that the Nuerat specimens 80% North African, Middle Neolithic Morocco, and 20% Levantine affinities prove it was non-African. This is a bold-faced lie. The Morez study never asserted such a claim. Metatron brazenly ignores isotope analysis, confirming the individual's African nativity, and he elevates flimsy statistical inferences above hard archaeological and linguistic evidence. His selective reading is a hallmark of bad faith argumentation. He weaponizes genetics while blithely dismissing complementary disciplines that would expose his distortions. So there are some hypocritical concessions and Eurocentric double standards. In the same breath as his racist misinterpretations, Metatron concedes that the ancient Kemites may stem from certain East and Central African contexts. Precisely the intra-African migrations documented by epipaleolithic aquatic technologies that spread from around the Great Lakes region and the Kantiore culture, which would represent a pre-dialectical ancestor of most Paleo-African or Niger-Egyptian populations, right? And these spread north up the Happy River Basin into the Delta. And then you also can examine the EM293 spread, which is a descendant of EV1515 and EZ830 observed within the Nuerat sample, right? And we're going to get into some of the affinities between Nuerat and some of the East African, pastoral traditions later on. Metatron refuses to connect these dots when inconvenient, obsessed instead with amplifying Eurasian narratives. His silence on Joel Irish's admission that West African dental morphologies align with Happy Basin traits betrays a staggering double standard. African complexity only matters when he can ignore it. And again, Metatron is promoting what is called the invading pharaonic race theory, right? And if you examine the study and some of the peer review analysis of the study, they actually castigated the authors for promoting the invading pharaonic race theory and trying to come up with Mesopotamian affinities. After the peer reviewers looked at the genetic methodology and some of the flaws in the statistical and probabilistic inferences made by these authors, they said that they should compare it with sub-Saharan African populations, right? That we call infra-Saharan African populations. And they said it would be inaccurate using these flawed statistics to promote a Mesopotamian affinity. So instead, the authors settled on, more of a Levantine-based ancestry, rooted in North Africa in the Middle Neolithic period of Morocco, right? And this is a period that we know about, EM81 inferences. We are aware of the, Amazigh and Imohag populations being closely related to the Beja populations, the Siwa, Oasis, Amazigh having infra-Saharan African affinities, etc., right? And this is something that Metatron completely ignores to push his propaganda. So when we examine closely, right, and we look at some of the flaws of the Nuerat study came in the same tradition as the Shunamin et al. Abasir Malek study. And that's a study that has been revealed that has numerous issues within it, numerous problems within the Shunamin et al. Study, problems that have been identified by Dr. Vanessa Davies, Stuart Tyson Smith, Shamark Decatur, etc., ad nauseum. And it's clear that there's an agenda by a lot of these scholars to try to promote the idea that the ancient Kemetic population was Eurasian. Again, going back to the invading pharaonic race theory, right? The invading pharaonic race model, right? It's very, very clear. So if we examine the Nuerat study in this regard, it suffers from critical methodological flaws rooted in the misuse of QPADM, admixture, and F statistics. For starters, the reference and model dependence in QPADM is a significant issue. The study bases its ancestry model on a narrow set of proxy populations, example North African Neolithic and Eastern Fertile Crescent groups. This means if crucial ancestral sources, such as ancient East African or Saharan connected populations like Moda, Kadruga, Takakori, etc. are absent, the analysis misattributes authentic ancient African genetic signals to Near Eastern proxies instead. Next, low genetic differentiation between North Africans and Near Eastern groups creates non-unique QPADM fits, yet the authors present a single model as definitive, without displaying alternative models with equivalent p-values or fit scores. They mask the ambiguity inherent in such reconstructions, implying more confidence than what is justified. Additionally, post-admixture drift is insufficiently addressed. Drift occurring after an ancient admixture event can mimic fresh gene flow when genetic drift subtly alters allele frequencies over time. The study's single 2-time coverage genome, and this was based upon the dental amplification of Nuerat, is especially prone to this error, potentially inflating perceived Levantine ancestry. Admixture is similarly problematic. It assumes genetic variation can be neatly partitioned into Flix clusters, a predetermined K, yet historical reality involves continuous gene flow and shifting boundaries. Ancestry proportions estimated under such conditions vary markedly with different K values or reference panel choices. And we know that they did not compare the Nuerat sample with any, infra-Saharan African cranium, with any infra-Saharan African, dental remain, and they completely left out, ancient DNA from the Great Lakes region, Moda in Ethiopia, and, even Tafarat within their intra-African analysis, right? So when ancient African genomes like Moda or Tafarat are included in the analysis, that 20% Levantine signal attributed to Nuerat may compress, revealing a stronger African component that the study overlooks. Regarding the F statistics, the F4 test comparing Nuerat to Levantine versus North African Neolithic ancestors can illustrate shared drift rather than recent migration. In reality, this ancient allele sharing might stem from deep common ancestry present across Northeast Africa and the Levant, from the ancestral North African, not a discrete time-bound influx of Mesopotamian genes. Perhaps most critically, the study is based on a single, initially low coverage genome in, the 2023 Morez, study, which was amplified using dental extracts in 2025, right? And again, this is a problem when you look at the fact that the majority of the Asudis traits of dental morphology were not present. Only a minority were present. So it is completely inaccurate to associate the Nuerat sample with, Eurasian populations when you have things like the canine mesial ridge observed in pre-dynastic and dynastic contexts by Jean-Philippe Gourdin, right? So when you base, a single person, right, like Nuerat, and they may reflect a specific social status or kinship or era within, the ancient Kemetic history, and not the entire population, this is not statistically defensible. It's not statistically defensible to infer that the ancient Egyptian population had strictly Levantine or Mesopotamian affinities based upon one sample, right? So when including proper ancient African reference panels, the genetic signals change dramatically, right? So you could find some, Moda East African relationship to Nuerat, and I actually made a chart here where I actually sequenced some of the ancient DNA from the African continent. And when you look at Nuerat sits smack dab in the middle of a, genetic pool where you have, the Great Lakes, foragers on one end, and going all the way up to Modaman in Ethiopia. Then you have the Kadruga sample in Kerma, pre-dynastic and dynastic Kimi, right? Then you have Earl Nile Pastoralis going up to Takakori and going up to Tafarat. So the Nuerat sample actually sits in the middle, in between the Ibero-Mauritians, right, and the Great Lakes foragers. And this kind of makes sense when you consider the fact that the Kantiore culture, the Great Lakes complex, would represent a pre-dialectical ancestor of most, West, Central, and Southern Africans that is also related to within the same language family of ancient Kemet. And there has been numerous historical linguistic analyses affirming this, right? So when you include African populations within the comparison of Nuerat, you will find, right, that they cluster closely with these populations than the Levantine counterparts, right? In comparative PCA and outgroup F3 analysis, the sample plots nearer to ancient African genomes than to Near Eastern ones, right? So here's a summary of the key methodological errors within the genetic analysis. The reference and model dependence on QPADM has missing African proxies that distort ancestry proportions, right? And there's a model non-uniqueness. Alternative models are ignored, inflating confidence in one interpretation. There's drift sensitivity. Unevaluated drift inflates Near Eastern ancestry within the sample. There's admixture bias. Results vary with K and sample composition, suppressing African signals. F statistics, misinterpretation. Shared drift that we have observed is misread as a recent migration. And archaeologically, if you look at, the analysis of Shamarka Keita and Christopher Ehret, you'll see that there is no evidence for a mass migration from the Levant to Northeast Africa during the Neolithic transition. There is, Levantine domesticates that were incorporated into an indigenous African mode of production, right? So there's a single sample limitation, right? There's a lack of replication, and unrepresentative sample render conclusions tenuous, speaking about the ancient Egyptians being so-called Levantine or Mesopotamians. When we integrate diverse ancient African genomes like Moda, Tafarat, Kesesi, Nyarindi, and Shumlaka, we can capture the full spectrum of African ancestry, right? We could report multiple QPADM models, showing p-values, standard errors, and model comparisons to avoid overconfidence in the Levantine, association, Mesopotamian association. You also have to address post-admixture drift, right? There are drift-sensitive tools and haplotype-based methods that we can infer. We're going to speak about that, further. And run a higher range of Ks. You're going to find, when you include African references, such as what we've done, you can clearly see infra-Saharan African affinities with the Nuerat sample. Haplotypes show you, the temporal analysis of how these populations move through time. And then more samples are needed, obviously, to justify this relationship. It's very, very clear, right? So when we continue and you look at the genetic continuities, right? These Y chromosome and mtDNA, as well as pathogen genomics, we can see, the work of Eugenia D'Atanasio, Dr. D'Atanasio, can trace certain EM2 lineages, such as EZ15941, EL516, and EV, 5001 back to the Lake Chad Basin, 10,000 years ago, followed by a spread into North Africa to 4,000 years ago, and then a spread south into infra-Saharan West Africa. When you look at EM78 subclades, you see high-resolution data revealing a northeast to West Africa movement 6,000 to 5,000 years before present. And then again, when you're talking about EV1515 from EZ830 that the Nuerat sample had down to EM293, you can see northeast African roots of the pastoral Neolithic populations that spread southward, affirming many of the beliefs and oral narratives of the so-called Bantu or Chaga populations that detail origins within classical Africa, right? Now, if you look at L3F3, right, you can see that populations, the Upper Egyptians in Gurna, share ancestry with Mandinka and Lake Chad groups, most likely descending from a 6,000 years ago East African source. Busby et al. Detects a Sahelian migration from East into West Africa 2,000 years ago, mirroring Diopian, oral analysis and the oral histories of Diopian historiography. Then you see M1, Northeast African M1, tied to Kemetic and Kushite migrations from East to West Africa. Now, Jean-Philippe Gourdin's analysis finds Middle Kingdom tuberculosis, with L5, L6 strains, right? And these are related to West African populations today. So within the Middle Kingdom, you have tuberculosis tuberculosis strains seen in modern West Africans, right? Now, when you're talking about, Abasir Malek, in the Abasir study, Dr. Jean-Philippe Gourdin's analysis finds samples that exhibit 3L genotypes, in Abasir in the late period, with genotypes found in West Africa and Brazil, proving these ancient pathogen exchanges. Now, Staverding et al.'s analysis actually confirms the idea that the Great Lakes complex or the Kantiore culture would represent the pre-dialectical ancestor of the Pharaonic civilization and contemporary African populations. He's able to trace parasites from the Great Lakes region up into the Happy Delta during dynastic Kemet, and then they spread into West, Central, and Southern Africa afterwards. So he's able to use schistosomes to trace the migrations of these human populations, right? So when you look at the physical anthropology and body plan, Metatron's insistence on excising the Nuerat individual from African variation flies in the face of overwhelming morphological evidence. Again, that Nuerat sample, if you want to say that it's Levantine and Mesopotamian, it had a tropical body plan, dark to black skin, and a dolichocephalic skull. Which populations have that type of skull, right? A tropical body plan and dark to black skin? Seriously, Which populations do you see with dolichocephalic skulls, long skulls, dark to black skin, and tropical body proportions? These are so-called infra-Saharan, inner African populations, right? These are so-called black populations. The same features that were used to castigate us from phrenology to now are features that they find within this ancient Old Kingdom sample. So if we were to take the idea that this is a Levantine or Mesopotamian population seriously, despite the fact of its methodological flaws, this actually affirms the beliefs of the Hebrew Israelites, the Nation of Islam, certain Black Sumerian ideologues, right, when they say that these ancient Eurasian populations were black. And when we look at, AT111 marker, the marker for white skin, that is, ubiquitous throughout the planet today. This is a very, very recent, about 10,000 years ago, marker, right? So relatively speaking, most of the populations of the planet prior to this time would have been dark-skinned, exceedingly dark. Even some of the European populations would have been dark-skinned. So Metatron completely ignores this. When you look at Dr. Z's, analysis of dynastic Egyptian, she observes a super Negroid body plan, right, matching infra-Saharan African populations. So Shamarka Keita's work on cranial and dental morphology shows, dolichocephaly, tropical body proportions, and dental traits endemic and related to modern Black African populations. A.M. Makoto et al.'s mummy analysis revealed robust melanin cells consistent with Black phenotypes in ancient Kemetic mummies, right? So this is very, very clear. And when we are able to analyze a lot of the genetic research, the genetic data clearly shows a modern incursion into ancient Kemet by many of these populations. When we're specific with our analysis, this is extremely, extremely, extremely clear. And, racists who have a white supremacist agenda like Metatron definitely ignore this. Dr. Soy Keita's pop affiliator analysis shows that the population of Kimi is majority infra-Saharan African, what Western scholars call sub-Saharan African. Dr. Vanessa Davies criticized Schuneman's Abasir study for using flawed genetic inferences to propose that ancient Kimi's lineage primarily stemmed from Levantine and Eurasian populations, likening it to the genetic version of the invading pharaonic race theory. She deemed it irresponsible, racist, and damaging, noting the inadequacy of the small sample size to draw generalized conclusions on the topic. Dr. Angela Stein affirms that the Takabudi, study being reported as H4A and more European than African is part of a racist and conservative legacy of making ancient Kimi a white civilization. The European scholars who reported on this completely ignored the context of migrations and the presence of Eurasian immigrants in Northeast Africa during the late period. Head curator, the Takabudi exhibition, Hannah Crowdy, confirmed in response that Takabudi's ancestors may not have always lived in ancient Kemet. So Dr. Doban et al. Asserts that an admixture plot of various African population reveals a Coptic component at k = 4, which may be indicative of Egyptian ancestry without Arabic influence. The Beja Ethiopians, Nuba, Fulani, Darfurians, Maasai, and Luya also have some of this ancestry. This is infra-Saharan Africans with this Coptic ancestry. A Near Eastern genetic study that revealed genomic similarity between the ancient Lebanese and ancient Egyptian population is based upon the JK2888 sample, which is estimated to have lived around 97 to 2 BC. So these are late period samples that, JK 2888, which is related to Levantines. And they're using this to try to infer that the entire ancient population was Levantine. This is definitely not true. A study by Dr. Sarah El-Kamel et al. Of modern North African and Middle Eastern populations reveal some recent gene flow from the East dating back to the Arab conquest period. This demographic migration and the Arabization process that submerged the original Berber language and customs seem to have been accompanied by substantial gene flow and genetic admixture. Dr. Lara Aruna et al. Study reveals complex migration patterns in North Africa, including the Arabization of Egypt in the 7th century and modern Egyptians having the lowest indigenous North African ancestry. Dr. Pagani et al. Study shows Arab admixture in modern Egyptians and Ethiopian populations dated to 750 years ago, consistent with the Islamic expansion. It specifically showed 80% non-African ancestry in modern Egyptians. When this is masked out, the Egyptian genome clusters closer to modern Yoruba in West Africa than Eurasian population. Modern Yoruba, closer to infra-Saharan West Africans than Eurasians. So Dr. Shamarka Keita connects the presence of EM35 in ancient Kimi to Pleistocene migrations northward. Furthermore, he associates EM2 and Kimi, exemplified by figures like Ramses III of the 20th dynasty, with inner African Happy River Basin populations, suggesting their role in the origin of the first pastoral cultures on the continent. Right? And when you look at the maternal analysis of the Berbers of the Siwa Oasis in Egypt, it reveals a high frequency of M1, LOA1, L3I, L4, and L4B2, which shows that they are closely related to infra-Saharan Africans and Eurasians. The 2018 study on Juhudinak showed that his maternal lineage was U5B2B5, and he was linked to Berber, Fulani, and Senegambian populations such as the Papel. A study by Holfelder et al. On genomic variation in Northeast Africa reveals that the modern Egyptian Copts and Arabs have the most Neanderthal gene of any population on the continent. Both Copts and Egyptian Arabs are estimated to be 70% European and related to the linear Monder-Keramic culture of Germany from 5500 to 4500 BC. So again, modern Egyptians and, modern Arabs and Copts in Egypt are linked 70% to Europe, not indigenous to Africa, according to Holfelder et al. Craniometric analysis shows that the Kerma population is more closely related to the founders of dynastic Kimi than the populations of the late period who experienced mixing with Mediterranean groups. These Mediterranean groups like Metatron, the stuff that he promotes. A study by Mani et al. Reveals that the genomic profile of modern Egyptians is not identical to the ancient Egyptians, and that they have ancestry from recent Eurasian migrations. And according to Dr. Shamarka Keita, cosmopolitan northern Egypt is less likely to have a population representative of the core indigenous population of the most ancient times. Genetic research conducted by Dr. Hassan et al. Reveals the presence of Y-DNA BM60 haplogroup among the Sudanese Copts. This lineage is associated with infra-Saharan Africans who originated in the Middle Happy River Valley, migrated northward, and founded dynastic Kemet. And then when we look at Dr. Wang et al.'s kinase domain receptor analysis, they reveal that East African pastoralists descend from ancient Kushite populations who migrated south. This matches the distribution of East African lactase persistence markers, 14010C into Central and Southern Africa. And this actually matches what the authors of the Morez et al. Study of the Nuerat Old Kingdom Mummy found, in the sense that you see Northeast African populations clearly migrated into Central and Southern Africa. That is exceedingly clear. The research of Dr. Hani Hara et al. Shows that the population of ancient Kemet share zygomatic traits with infra-Saharan African populations that are not seen among modern North Africans and Eurasians, right? And when you look at the craniometric analysis again, the authors of the Morez et al. Study concluded that because they didn't compare, so-called sub-Saharan African cranium to the Nuerat sample and only, compared Eurasian, cranium to the sample, that it must be genetically Eurasian. And this is the definition of academic malpractice. Dr. SRZ, again, showed that the body plan, studied by comparing intermembral, brachial, and crural indices, with literature value, shows that the ancient Egyptian exhibited a super negroid body plan with longer distal line segments relative to proximal segments. And this is what's seen in many, African and Black populations. Dr. Shamarka Keita's analysis of dental, cranial, brachial, crural, and intermembral indices reveal that the populations of pre-dynastic and dynastic Kimi had tropical body proportions and were closely related to modern Africans and African Americans. The Nuerat study had less than half of the primary dental morphological traits. So how could they assume from that the population was Eurasian and not infra-Saharan African? They absolutely 100% cannot. And they are promoting, academic malpractice and malfeasance with respect to this. And somebody like Metatron probably knows this, but he is, convincingly and consciously being racist and consciously trying to show, that these populations, that this Nuerat sample is not Black and not African. So Metatron's analysis is not merely flawed, it is a disgraceful exercise in academic malpractice. His racially motivated refusal to engage with interdisciplinary evidence, archaeological, linguistic, genetic, and, bioanthropological, reveals a deeper commitment to erasing Africa from its own history. So this is a complete rebuttal, and let this rebuttal stand as a testament to the intellectual bankruptcy of Eurocentric distortions and a call to reclaim Kemet as an unapologetically Black African civilization.
True as gold to comma green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Big drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamjiverse.